So stress, depression, anxiety, these are all very encouraging words to begin a TED Talk with. But I did want to dive into each of them because they are common stressors for mental health. So we'll start with stress first. So typically when you think of stress, you think of it in two primary ways, acute and chronic. So acute is more short-lived, maybe these kind of minor stressors, so think stuck in a traffic jam, or you're going to be late for an assignment, or just running late in general. Chronic stress is more long-term and constant, and so think about if you're in a toxic work environment or if you're constantly having arguments with your significant others, this can contribute to chronic stress. Depression, on the other hand, is more of this constant feeling of feeling sadness or loss of interest, and this can be based on seasonal, so maybe you're not a fan of the winter, or perhaps it could be situational, so based on a series of circumstances. There also can be no cause to depression. And then lastly, anxiety are kind of these common everyday fears or worries. So you could have test anxiety, maybe anxiety related to finances, maybe even anxiety surrounding TED Talks, right? So all of these can contribute. Something else you might have heard of is this fight or flight response. So I'll give you an example in a minute of where this is helpful to have. But overall, it's a helpful mechanism. It's a survival mechanism that enacts your nervous system. And so certain situations, this can be very helpful. However, what can happen is if we're in high-stress situations, this will often enact this feeling, and it can be really bad and give chronic health defects. So for example, it could lead to high blood pressure, clogged arteries, even lead to anxiety and depression. So I mentioned that it can be helpful sometimes. So if you're ever on safari and you find yourself in the situation of the wildebeest, you want this fight or flight response to be enacted, right? So these life-changing circumstances, but again, not helpful on a day-to-day basis. Next, I want to talk about the really strong connection between mental and physical wellness. And so there's lots of research out there that shows if you have poor mental health, this can lead to chronic physical illness. And then conversely, if you're feeling good about your body and working out, this also in turn will lead to positive mental wellness. So we are one body, right? Not separate body and mind. And so it makes sense that these two contribute. And so an example of this is if you've heard of runner's high. So this is when these endorphins are enacted after you have some type of rigorous exercise. And this will promote better mood swings. This will lead to reduction of anxiety and depression. So again, just an example of how mental and physical wellness are really intertwined. So why am I talking about this? So I have a strong connection to mental health, both professionally and personally. So professionally, as I mentioned in my bio, about a year ago I became Dr. Jernigan, and my dissertation topic was on mental health for international students in higher ed. I returned from India about 6 days ago, so still getting over jet lag a little bit, but on that trip I was able to look into my dissertation research more, and that was a really meaningful experience. In addition, I'm deemed what's called a mental health champion at UC. So this means I went through a series of trainings to better equip if any of my students have a mental health crisis, or if any of my colleagues have a mental health crisis, I'm more equipped to assist them. And then lastly, I've taught at UC over the past decade. Any lecture that I have, I've always included some type of reference to mental wellness for my students' benefit. Personally, though, I also have a really strong connection to mental health. So when I was an undergrad student about 12 to 13 years ago, I struggled with suicide ideation, so contemplating suicide. And I felt this way for about a year or so, and in my mind, there was no other option beyond suicide. So it's not that I was choosing that, I just didn't see any other way out. And I always say the best and hardest thing I could have ever done was finally tell my close family and friends. And a side effect of that is it helped me over the past 10 years become more vulnerable in all areas of my life. So 10 years ago, I couldn't even tell my family and friends I was struggling with suicide, and now I'm telling a room full of strangers. And so that's been a great output of that. And so while I'm happy to say I no longer struggle with suicide ideation, mental health is still something that I have to give daily attention to. And now I've gotten to the point where I can recognize my headspace, and if I'm starting to feel anxious or depressed, then I can correct that. So that's what the rest of my talk is going to be focused on, ways that I mitigate my mental health, and maybe some of the ways that you can as well. So I want to have a little vocab lesson first because as we know, words matter. So if you use our friend Google to look up the word commit, it says carry out or perpetrate a mistake, crime, or a moral act. So you can see a lot of negative connotations here. And so you may notice that a lot of people have stepped away from saying someone committed suicide to someone has died by or from suicide. And as I mentioned with my own personal story, it wasn't that I was choosing suicide, it was that I didn't see any other option. So it's considered a mental illness if someone dies by suicide. So just like if someone had cancer, you wouldn't say they committed cancer, right? You would say they died from or by cancer. So it's the same thing with suicide. We're moving away from saying commit to more they died from or by. So as I kind of go into how we can better our own mental health, this is one of my favorite quotes, so you cannot pour from an empty cup. And while this seems selfish, I actually think it's the opposite. So I want to be the best version of myself to show up for my family and friends, but I can't do that if my own energy is depleted. So actually taking care of yourself first is going to in turn make you better to help other people. So on the next slide, I'll have 8 ways that you can practice self-care. So certainly not an exhaustive list, but we're going to go through each one. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand or come join me on stage, but I just want you to think through how well you're doing each of these 8 things, and then perhaps that's one you can take away to work on in the future. All right, so very broadly at the top, do you take time for yourself? Of course, this can look very different for everyone. Next, we'll talk about the importance of sleep in a little bit, but are you getting enough sleep each night? I love movies as much as the next person, but they also can be a time sucker, so are you having moderation of these things? Are you staying hydrated? Do you spend time with your squad and have fun activities? How's your smile looking? Are you having good hygiene? And then this next one, so having a relaxing routine before bed has been shown to lead to better sleep. And then also having a nurturing morning routine sets you up for success throughout your day. So I don't know if you're like me where maybe you've missed your alarm or just overslept in general. The hecticness of getting ready in the morning doesn't seem to conclude with that morning. It often extends into the rest of my day, so I feel anxious for the rest of the day. Whereas if I start off my morning with enough time to get ready, I feel productive, then that sets me up for success for the rest of the day. And then lastly, what's your purpose? So do you know what you're passionate about? So again, we could add probably hundreds more to this list, but just 8 examples of maybe areas that if you feel like you're not working towards these, you can focus on a few in the future. Okay, so some 4 other techniques that I'm going to talk about to bolster your mental wellness. We'll start with the first one. So this is expressing gratitude. So expressing gratitude, I think you can never say thank you enough. So this certainly should not end at Thanksgiving time. And there's many ways that you can express gratitude. And when you do so, there's lots of research that shows it increases your mood, lessens anxiety and depression. So all good things. So you might have a gratitude journal where you keep note of what you're thankful for. Journaling isn't really my style. So instead, often what I'll do is when I have a drive home after a long day at work, I'll think about my day, certainly thinking about what could have gone better today, but then also focusing on my wins for the day and what am I thankful for. So next is sleep. So if you're like me, I need 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night to function, but regardless, sleep is so important for your body. So it helps you recharge, be re-energized, but what comes in closely with sleep is having time management right, and also learning the art of saying no. So when I was younger, I was definitely guilty of saying yes to every single opportunity because I had to bolster my CV and my resume. As I've gotten older, I've learned that you can't say yes to every opportunity, and so being more selective about what I commit to. All right, so find a good rubber ducky. And by this, I mean find your community. So as I said, a really pivotal part in my story was when I finally opened up to my friends and family. Whenever I talk about mental health to my students, I always say don't suffer in silence. So really, it's important to find that core group of people. And then additionally, something that's been helpful for me is therapy. So there's something about talking to a stranger who has kind of an outside perspective of your life to kind of speak to your problems and give you advice in that way. And then lastly is medication. So unfortunately, there's still a lot of shame and stigma surrounding medication, but of course with your doctor's advice, I know of a lot of friends and family that are on antidepressants or medicine to reduce their anxiety, and it's been life-changing for them. Something I want to focus on here is self-talk. So I am definitely guilty of having negative self-talk. So sometimes I say things to myself that are so critical and harsh, I would never say it to another person because they're so mean, but I'm fine saying it to myself. So we are our own worst critics, and sometimes we can be overly critical of our abilities. With that, though, there sometimes is a balance of also having grit and resilience. So I know finals and exams are coming up, so maybe you can't quite watch the new season of Love is Blind right now. You need to focus on studying and being ready for your exams. So it's this balance of being your own cheerleader and pumping yourself up, but then also having grit and resilience and knowing when you need to kind of push forward. All right, so something else that's been really instrumental for me is meditation. So I specifically chose this image because this is what I had in mind before I got into meditation. I thought I had to strike an impossible yoga pose overlooking an ocean, and then I would find my Zen. So that's certainly not the case. I have done meditation everywhere, in my car, in my office, at home, right? And so this is something that really calms and centers me. Part of meditation is something called mindfulness. So mindfulness certainly occurs within meditation, but it can also occur outside of meditation. And this is all about having self-awareness. So there's a really simple technique called noting. And even though it's very simple, I often find that simple ideas are the most profound. And so noting is simply being aware of your emotions and feelings. So am I starting to get agitated? Am I starting to get frustrated? And while it doesn't prevent those emotions from happening, what it does do is allows you to react to them quicker. And so I'm not pretending that I don't get angry or frustrated, but I can notice more quickly when I'm starting to feel that way and be more proactive about mitigating those. So again, mindfulness and meditation for me has been really calming. So I wanted to give you an example of a very easy meditation that you can literally do from anywhere. And so this is all about deep breathing. So deep breathing is really great for you, both mentally and physically. And so this is simply 4 counts of 4 or 3 counts of 4. So you inhale your breath, take a deep breath for 4 seconds. When you've done that, you hold that breath for 4 seconds. And then when you've done that, you exhale that breath for 4 seconds. And I do this maybe if I'm in between meetings, if I have 1 or 2 minutes, and it just calms down my heart rate, clears my mind, almost gives me the sensation that I've gone for a nice long walk, even though I'm still sitting in my office. So I want to conclude with this slide and kind of show 2 different trajectories. So maybe you're more on this top arrow where you've had to focus a little bit on your mental health, but other things have to take your attention more, and maybe mental health isn't one of those things that you always have to worry about. But maybe you're more on this bottom arrow like me, where your mental health journey has had a lot of ups and downs. So what's important about these 2 arrows, though, is you both come out on the end. And so I think one of the most dangerous things we can do as humans is compare ourselves. Again, getting back to that negative self-talk can be really detrimental to our mental health. And so I truly believe if you spend the time to invest on your mental health, then it's going to lay the groundwork to having a fulfilling life. And in my opinion, that's certainly an idea worth spreading. Thank you so much.